We're here this afternoon with Dean Thomas Gibbs of the Cathedral Church of All Saints in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. I've known the Dean for more years than either one of us will admit. We both have a connection with the islands. My mother's family was originally from here, and the Dean had been in other parishes when he started his ministry, but has been here in the Virgin Islands now for almost 50 years.
50 years.
But we're here today to talk about his experiences coming from Evanston, Illinois to Amherst College in Amherst, Massachusetts. People might not think that that's a very long distance, but in many ways it was. And I think that having known Tom now for a number of years, that this is something that has been very meaningful in his life and contributed to his successful education and his successful work within the church here in the Virgin Islands, as well as at a number of churches in the continental United States. So to start off, I'd like to ask Tom how he actually got to Amherst and who may have encouraged him to apply.
It all began with a visit by the Dean of Admissions, Amherst Dean Eugene Wilson, who made a foray from Amherst on the East Coast to the West Coast, recruiting especially minority students and others who were not highly visible at Amherst at the time. And my homeroom teacher at Evanston Township High School suggested that I meet, quote, this person, and that was tantamount to a command in those days. And I had a visit with Dean Eugene Wilson and decided that I would come to Amherst College. As a matter of fact, I didn't apply at any other institution, so I don't know what would have happened had I not been admitted. But the fates favored me, and I entered with the class of 51. So that means I went in September 1947, which now seems eons ago. And of course, I got involved in the whole fraternity, as some said, debacle. When I was asked to join Phi Kappa Psi, and not knowing that I was supposed to say no, I said yes. I would go through the rushing process, and I was pledged. And then ensued 9 months of will you, won't you, or should you, shouldn't you, or can you, can't you. But in the end, most of the college and all of those pledged with me, and most of the class of 51 stuck by me, and I was pledged by what became Phi Alpha Psi because we were expelled by the national fraternity. And of course, subsequently, all fraternities were expelled from Amherst. But it was, a traumatic experience because I came out of the Midwest, not blaming the Midwest for my inadequacies. I just stepped into a world I'd never known, and had a lot of learning to do, a lot of growing up to do, and Amherst made it possible. And I came out without the rancor and bitterness, I think, of some of my colleagues who felt a sense of betrayal that I joined the fraternity when, as I said, I should have said no. Well, I jumped in feet first or head first, and got involved, as a matter of fact, in everything in the fraternity. But Professor Lumley thought I could run, so I got involved in cross country and then winter relay and then track in the spring, and so I didn't have much time for intramural sports. But everything else that was going on in the fraternity, I did get involved in, and because I thought it was a thing to do. But studies were not neglected, because at Phi Psi, there was an emphasis on keeping up your grades, you know, and but the whole Amherst atmosphere, which we used to describe, you know, well, the gentleman's sea, you can get through, was no longer obtaining because of the new curriculum, which started new at that time, which started with the class of 47. And it was a rigorous experience, one for which I was barely prepared, but you can learn a great deal in a short time if you have to. And in order to stay there, I had to. To the surprise of many, I did make magna cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa. Again, I wasn't supposed to.
To what extent did you find that your preparation in Evanston held you in good stead once you got to Amherst?
As a matter of fact, some of my colleagues in high school always looked askance at me because I always had books and I was reading. But again, by getting good grades in high school, I think that helped me get into Amherst, but also because of my reading, love of reading, I was better prepared than some of my colleagues at Amherst who had gone to some of the better prep schools. You have to understand that the Fifth Ward, the black community, we didn't have that emphasis on education, which they now have, and all too many were skating, they were getting by, they were passing. And though it's the home of Northwestern University, it was also a segregated city. We had the white YMCA, the black YMCA. We had the white troops. I was interested in Boy Scouting. We had the black troop. We had the three white Episcopal churches. And of course, I was a member of the AME church, but because the scoutmaster was a member of St. Andrew's Church, I sort of came into the Anglican Church via the back door. Part, I think, of my interest in the Virgin Islands stemmed from the fact that I came from a closed society, and there's a freedom in the Virgin Islands which I never enjoyed in Evanston.
To what extent did you find when you got to the Amherst campus that the other students and the faculty were welcoming to you and your classmates from Evanston, or was there a difficult social interaction or academic interaction because of race issues?
Well, I did not notice it at the time, and part, of course, of what I will be saying is reflection after the fact. But I plunged into the Amherst experience as socially inept, economically not top drawer, politically not knowing very much. But I had the advantage of several faculty who were most helpful in helping me adjust to the new situation, and some classmates who were, I think, top-notch especially after the fraternity debacle started. But for me, it was a learning experience which I never anticipated, never expected, and in a very real sense, I think, I learned as much in terms of social interaction as from the books at Amherst College.
Well, Amherst at the time was certainly an all-male campus. To what extent was there social interaction with some of the girls' colleges in the Valley?
Well, that was every Friday and Saturday, either to Smith or Mount Holyoke. And of course, we had the parties and dances at Amherst College. We went to those at Smith or Mount Holyoke. I didn't realize, of course, at the time that I was very limited in what I could do or what I should do, because certain things were expected, which my colleagues, when I say colleagues, I mean the African Americans, didn't tell me until after I'd gotten an invitation to join a fraternity, and then they told me what I should have done when the invitation was extended. But, as I say, I was a bit unknowing, and I just plunged into everything Amherst had to offer at the time.
And I'd be interested in your perspective on social life, both at Amherst and at schools in the Valley, were impacted by being a part of a well-respected fraternity.
Well, definitely at Amherst, social life revolved around the fraternities, if ands or buts, which is why those who were not members of the fraternities had the Lord Jeff Club, but it wasn't quite the same, because there was a camaraderie and just a way of looking at things in the fraternity system, which did not obtain with the Lord Jeff Club and the independents, because some did not join the Lord Jeff Club. And you also had an entree to more social activities if you were a member of a fraternity when you went to the other schools. And for some reason, the dances sponsored by the fraternities were the in things.
Have you kept up your relationship with any of your fraternity brothers?
With a good many, a few in class of 51, more in the class of 50, and some, no, more in the class of 52, and some in the class of 53. But with the demise of the fraternity system at Amherst, we tended more to think in terms of the class, I mean, the class members with whom you were close, rather than fraternity members.
I guess I'd be interested, and I think our colleagues would be interested in how you think the Amherst experience prepared you for your life's work in the church and in various communities in which you've served.
Well, one thing it did was to, I guess, make me something of a protagonist, because after Amherst, I didn't hesitate to plunge into anything I thought might be beneficial. And certainly because of my Amherst education, I considered myself the peer of anyone else, even though it may not have been true. But by taking advantage of what was offered, and with the support, I must always add, of so many of my colleagues, especially in the class of 51, but I have to also say some of the upperclassmen who, at times when I wanted to give up, sort of talked me into staying with it, not as much for my sake as for the sake, as they put it, of Amherst College. And it was a learning process that I think it stood me in good stead, even though as a result I've been sort of dictatorial and because of the Amherst education, which I, at the time, of course, being young, said was superior to all others.
Understandably. Were there particular classmates or roommates with whom you interacted during those 4 years who have made a significant impression on you at that time, and to what extent have you continued interaction or relationships with your Amherst colleagues?
Well, I think there were roughly 17 of us in the pledge class, and I had good relations for a good many years, I would say, with roughly half, if slightly under half. Other classmates, well, two in particular, one from Evanston, we've continued our relationship to the present. I sort of lost track of some of the older Amherst men, the class of 50 and 49, but they too made a distinct impression because they were in the forefront of the battle at a time when pressures were on them and on the fraternity to withdraw the offer of a pledge to me. But also I have to say that several members of the faculty were most supportive. Professor Beebe and Coach Lumley, just to name two. There were others, of course, who were supportive of the house and what we were doing. And I think most of the opposition, such as it was, and it really wasn't that strong at the college, came from upperclassmen who were afraid of what it might do in terms of their relationships with other Phi Kappa Psi's and the business world. But we were able to get through all of that, I think, in a very healthy way. Though some of my African American colleagues registered their disappointment with me for joining the fraternity instead of joining the Lord Jeff Club.
But I'd also like to talk with you a bit about who your roommates were and what impact you may have had on them and they on you.
Well, my first roommate was Mercer Cook. We were the only two, well, we used to say blacks. We were the only two blacks who were there, and we were roommates in Morrow. Oh. No, well, anyway, I can't recall the dorm we were in, but anyway, we got along very well, but Mercer was really a much more sophisticated youngster than I was. His father was professor at Howard, and
he'd grown up in Washington.
Right, and I came out of a social ethos which was far superior to anything that I had experienced in Evanston. I think I grew and matured, and I surpassed him eventually, but that's another story.
Well.
But it was, I had to play catch up. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes in playing catch up, I was not always sensitive to the feelings of others who wanted to be supportive of me and what I was going through. At times, I think I was suspicious. At other times, I just wanted to plain know why the offers of friendship. And it took some learning on my part to come to the realization that I would have to deal with each person on his own terms vis-a-vis where I happened to be at the moment, and that not everyone was an enemy, nor conversely everyone a friend. But when you are playing catch-up, when you have to grow 10 or 11 or 12 years in 4 years, it's sometimes impossible not to make some mistakes. And some I've always regretted because they turned out to be wonderful human beings. But I had rebuffed an offer of friendship early on, and there was no retracing steps.
Well,
Other offers which I accepted, I'd made a poor choice, but again, there was no retracing steps.
within your college years, though, did you have experiences that you feel have shaped your life as a member of a diverse community?
Oh, most certainly. One I will always remember when I spent on a spring vacation, Easter vacation, as we used to call it, with Professor Cook, and was exposed to Washington, D.C. socially in a way that Midwesterners don't always appreciate. Similarly, a couple of years later, with another roommate, visiting in Maryland, just on the border of Washington, D.C., and again being exposed to a social milieu that was completely foreign to me growing up in Evanston. And the ability to, same, visiting New York with another classmate, taking advantage of all of these, I think helped me immeasurably. But it also made me want to excel, for want of a better phrase, to be the equal of, and to prove that. And I guess I was really trying to prove it to myself more than anything else. But somewhere out of that whole welter, I did become, in the long run, who I am, basically because of what started at Amherst College. And so much of the good I do attribute to Amherst College. Some was not so good, but for better or for worse, I guess I am who I am, and I can only blame God. He made the opportunities possible.
Dean, have you been back to the Amherst campus in the last 10 years?
No. I was last year in my 40th reunion. I've been intending to, but always something comes up.
Have you kept in touch with any of your classmates at all?
Oh yes. As I say, one, Charlie Tritzler, class of '51, keeps me informed. He's visited here several times, and when I've been in the States, I've seen Charlie and Dee, his wife, and others sporadically. We correspond and talk about Amherst days.
Was church a part of your experience at Amherst at all? Because Grace is right across the street from the Lord Jeff.
Right.
It's still there.
Oh, yes. Only in the sense I went to chapel.
Okay.
And I had another classmate who was, as I say, a Methodist, Reverend Mr. Laird, and I went several times. But it wasn't a very large part of my Amherst experience. Only when I went home, of course, then I had to go to church.
When you graduated from Amherst, did you go right on to graduate school, or did you go back to your community?
No, I went to the University of Chicago Law School because they'd instituted what was called the Amherst College University of Chicago Law School scholarship, and I won that. And so I went to law school for a year, and kind of with all due respect, I opted out of that. But I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I joined the Army, and I spent 3 years in counterintelligence corps. I joined the Army to see the world, and they stationed me in Washington, D.C., because Washington had become predominantly black, and the black population of Washington was not talking to white CIC agents, and this is Korean conflict time, and there I connected with the National Cathedral and John Burgess, who later became Bishop of Massachusetts, influencing me then to go to Episcopal Theological School in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So kind of a series of fortuitous events.
I'm sure that the experience in dealing with the military had its positive impacts as well. But you ultimately wound up going to the seminary in Cambridge, and then where was your first church after that?
That was at St. John's in Christiansted, because I spent a summer there in what we call field work. And after graduation, I had the opportunity to come to St. Thomas for what we call the curacy, 3 years under a senior priest. And I did that at All Saints because there was no place for me in the inn. In those days, opportunities for young black clergy were limited. So I could get into the mission field, which was the Virgin Islands. Prior to my coming here, no blacks had been sent to any place other than Liberia. And I came for the 3 years, and then I was called up to the national headquarters in New York for 5 years. And then Bishop Mills made me come home again, back to the diocesan office, and 1 year later they elected me rector of All Saints. And there I've been ever since, and I still haven't figured out why God is punishing me.
Oh, no. What kinds of changes have you seen at All Saints, say, in the last 10 years?
Well, I've seen it grow into a church that is reaching out. Now, we always had the school, and that, I think we were kind of resting on our laurels. Well, this is our thrust into the community, and content with that. But now we're getting more and more involved in the life of the community, and things are taking place here that would have been unheard of 15, 20 years ago. I think our people were pretty much satisfied with their church. It was one of the foremost churches. Hadn't been for some years, but they didn't know that. But that was their attitude. It was the English church, the church on Garden Street, and we want to keep it that way. But we've branched out and involved in all kinds of things, especially, trying to work with our younger people. Our scouting program has always been strong.
To what extent have you continued to stay in touch with your colleagues from seminary?
I think more from seminary than from college, though the college ties, of course, are longer, and we cover a multitude of sins. But you form some closer relationships in seminary, I think precisely because of the small size of the class and the intensive retreats and this kind of thing, which sort of pulled us together in a way that's not the norm at a college or university. But I value my college years really as strongly as I do my seminary years, because without the Amherst experience, I don't think I would have gone on to seminary.
To what extent have you found the students here in the cathedral schools actively engaged in academic learning?
Well, they're very much engaged in that, because I don't say it threateningly, though they sometimes take it that way, because you see, if you come to the cathedral school, it's shape up or ship out time. I try to impress upon them only because if you don't take full advantage of what is being offered, you're wasting your time, but you're also wasting our time, and you're wasting your parents' money. And we really want students who are interested in learning. It's the next building block. Elementary school being the first, and the high school experience being the next building block. And you need those blocks to go on to graduate school, or developing a skill, or going into the military. Whatever you're going to do in the future, you need to be well-grounded.
Do you get a fair number of students coming from other islands to St. Thomas to attend the cathedral schools?
Yes, a good many. We have Tomians, we have Crucians, we have some from St. John, but we have them also from, as we say, down island, from the continental United States. We have Muslims, we have, of course, the Jewish faith, we have all the denominations, we have some of no religious faith. But the common denominator is, seeking a good education. Of course, you have to go to chapel, but...
Do you have the resources that you need for the cathedral schools?
No, not by any stretch of the imagination. And, we've instituted something that it's caught on. It wasn't well received at first, but every second Sunday we take up an extra collection and help with the maintenance of the school buildings. Any particular problem that arises, unforeseen, the cathedral tries to take care of for the school, because you can only stretch the tuition so far. And we've always got to keep in reserve enough to provide for the increases for our teachers the next year. So we're sometimes between a rock and a hard place, but so far, God's been good and we're making it. After the hurricane, we just went computer. And I think it's been a good thing for us. And now we envision opening classes for older people. Of course, we have the plans in the planning stage and raising money for the new campus. And we'll have to decide what to do with this campus, because you can't destroy the buildings just because you have other buildings. We now have a new outreach ministry.
Given your Illinois connections, I have to ask you if you ever envisioned seeing an African American in the White House.
Didn't envision it, hoped for it, said a few prayers, but never expected them to materialize. So it was a grand occasion to see him there in Grant Park.
I think all of us will remember that as being just an extraordinary experience. I had some colleagues from the law firm who got very involved in the campaign and were in Grant Park, and they said it was just amazing, the electricity and the camaraderie of those thousands of people in the park were really quite amazing. I think that I think that the country is really getting the benefit of an extraordinary team of people that he's put together. Government is never easy, and it certainly has not been easy for him. But I think it's been a wonderful example, particularly to our young people, of what you can do, and the importance of integrity in what you do. As well.
And cooperation, because this is really a Rainbow Coalition, which we only talked about with Jesse Jackson, but I think we've now seen that it is possible. And I was amazed at the number of young people who registered and voted for the first time.
That was extraordinary, and I think that it says a lot about the man and also about the issues that he brought to the forefront in terms of the integrity of his campaign, and I think it bodes well for our country. These are challenging times, there's no question about it, but I think that he's brought in a very strong group of men and women, people of color, and I think that he's taking advantage of all of the new media, which you know, I'm glad that I can work my computer, but my kids are on Facebook and they're doing this and they're doing that, and even my grandchildren have their own little, you know, baby computer. But that's the way the world is, and when you can communicate instantly with someone thousands of miles away from you and have a conversation online, that's got to bring people together, it seems to me.
Right, and also I see coming out of his experience a new respect for government. I mean, that it's not, quote, a bad thing, close quote. And this whole concept of big government, or the government being too large. The government's got to exist for the benefit of the people, and need will dictate the size.
Right.
But a respect for, I think, is important. And I think some of that's going to be restored. I think we had some of it with John Kennedy, and then we sort of lost it. And now I think it's coming back. But then also a respect for authority. I think we lost a great deal of it, and now I think it's coming back. The sense that discipline is important.
Right.
It's got to start when we're young. I mean, we've got to learn self-discipline in order to be able to function effectively.
And I think that gives Americans a real sense of pride that these are people who really care about their neighbors, who care about the people in their communities. And I think that sends a very positive message to our young people. I mean, the students at Amherst, the students here at the cathedral schools, many of them are doing public service, even as they're continuing to go to school, and I think that bodes well for the future. Well, we should be requiring it. But I think it's fine to require it, because that's really looking out for their best interest in terms of being contributing members of their communities, whether they ultimately are here in the Virgin Islands or whether they're in Chicago or Evanston. I think that I saw my parents getting involved in the communities where they were living, and you know, I thought, well, that was the thing you were supposed to do. So I got involved in several nonprofits. I served on a school board for a number of years, and my brother has done that, my children have done that, and I feel very good about that because it helps their communities, it helps them build their knowledge base on issues related to education and service. And I think if more young people get engaged in their communities, that bodes well for them, and it bodes well for the people they serve.
Unless you do get involved and serve your community, you really don't get to know that community. If you don't know it, you really can't respect it, and you'll drift elsewhere.
Right.
But also, you know, because I've been fighting this battle of education for almost half a century now, but we've got to have some drastic changes in our approach to education. I'm hoping a lot of this will, you know, be spearheaded by Washington, but I think that the church can play a great part in it, because what I've noticed is that we are leaving education to the schools. And education has got to start with the family.
Absolutely.
It's got to start when we are young. And schools can help reinforce. The schools can provide certain technical and academic things. but the process, whatever process it's going to be, it's got to begin at home. And in such a way that our kids want to learn. We always wanted to go to school, as much to get away from Pops, but if you aren't going to school, I have some things you can do,
right.
Sort of thing. But we enjoyed school, and ultimately our youngsters do not enjoy school, I'm sorry to say. It's a burden. They're going because their parents are forcing them, but just the innate love of learning, of reading, of participating, of being with their classmates, that's absent in too many cases.
That's true, and I think it has to start in the home. It has to start early. I read to my children before they even understood the words that I was reading, and I think that parents who really care about their children and realize that their children can make a difference in their communities as they grow older, realize that education is really a key. And if they build the love of learning early on, it will make a huge difference. I mean, when children always have a book, one of the rules in our house was you always are working on a book. And if you're coming near the end of the book, you've got another book that you're going to read. And of course, the internet has also opened up new areas for them to be able to explore an interest in the arts or an interest in geography, whatever it may be. And now that computers are so readily available at relatively reasonable prices, cost shouldn't be an issue.
But my problem is how to get those who are not involved in the cathedral school interested in coming to the cathedral to learn. And again, it's they haven't had the push from home, and we've got to find some mechanism, that is the church, so that we can motivate them to at least give it a shot, try it.
Have you brought some children who are not at the cathedral schools into your summer programs here?
Well, not enough. It's almost insignificant because it's mostly been remedial in order to pass in September to the next highest grade. But what I'm talking about is a very meaningful educational experience, not just for the summer, but after school closes, you see. Since we have the facilities and we can use them, I would prefer they be used 24 hours a day. I know that's not possible, but at least let's use them for 10 or 12 hours a day in an effort to rescue some of these youngsters.
Because a lot of them are actually quite smart. I mean, they get into trouble because they're so smart and can figure something out.
That's why they get into trouble.
Right, exactly. But if you could channel that into learning experiences, it certainly would make a difference. And there are scholarships available for students who need them at most of your private and public universities these days.
Right.
So cost of education should not be a debilitating aspect of a child's being able to move forward.
And this is where I hope, a school like Amherst would pioneer and a year of service in the inner city before going to graduate school.
There is a good bit of that.
Right at home, you see. We don't have to go to Africa,
Right.
you see, to do some rescuing, but we can do it right in the United States.
And there are some very good programs in major cities and even in some smaller communities where youngsters who are have the ability to be good communicators, who can teach children who are in the 4th or 5th grade the basics of using a computer and how you can use a computer from an academic standpoint. And I think that, as you say, it's encouraging students to get engaged with their communities and to use talents that they have that they're not even using at a particular point in time.
Unless it's athletics, you see. We have this kind of program going on with our athletes and our would-be athletes. You see, unless you are an exceptional sports figure, you may have 5 or 10 years. Then what are you going to do after that, you see? And also, the incident of broken legs and broken arms and, careers cut short, then what do? You see, if you don't have an education,
right,
you see, behind you. Dr. J he can go to school after he's finished. He's accumulated, But most of our youngsters aren't going to reach that plateau.
Right.
And it's difficult to help them understand that the funnel is very, very small at the end. See, a great number of athletes up here,
right,
but those who really are going to make their living that way, it's a very small number. And then what do you do?
Exactly. But you have someone like a Tim Duncan who comes back every summer to St. Croix and comes over to St. Thomas. He is idolized by many of the young people, but he stresses education and the importance of being committed to academic learning. Even if you think you're the best basketball player that ever existed, that you won't be able to care for yourself and be a positive role model in the community if you don't get engaged. And I think that's a very important message to send, and it's certainly one that Amherst, I think, for years, for hundreds of years, has really imbued in their students, service to their community and giving back. I look at the young people coming out of the school in the last 12 years, and they've done some extraordinary things. And whether it's going down into the deep south, which is still very southern, or it's going to Indonesia, or it's going behind the former Iron Curtain, young people really want to give back and want to help. And I think that to the extent that we can take advantage of that, it's good for the school, it's good for the community. I worry about the heightened level of violence in the Virgin Islands these days. It was never like that when I was here during the summers when I was in elementary school and in high school. But things have changed.
Oh, yes.
And unfortunately not for the better.
There was discipline.
Right.
Well, it was the whole community disciplining
right,
any one child.
Exactly. It wasn't your mother. If
right,
the next door neighbor saw
right,
you doing something
right,
before you got home, your mother or your father or your caretaker had been told.
But we took responsibility
right,
for
right. We got someone
other.
out of that, whatever the situation was. But you don't see that happening today.
Well, growth and individual rights, and without a commensurate emphasis on responsibilities, see, you can't separate them.
Right.
Or you do at your peril. But somehow we've got to reintegrate, because we no longer have the yards, you see. And with success, financial success, people built their homes. They went to the countryside. We had built-in babysitters. We had built-in older people to help with homework when people lived in close, in the close yard community. And so we've got to find a substitute for that, especially with more parents, both parents working, you see. After school learning, after school homework. Let's use some of these rooms for that. But even that won't, solve our problem completely here in the Virgin Islands, because we have to have a new understanding of what the community is. And at this point, our community is fractured. Now, we like to say, well, it's because of the aliens, people who have come in here. But I see a lot of this coming from people who were born right here, because I baptized them. And they've strayed. I won't blame it on my baptism, but the pressures, peer pressure, you know, it's something we've never seriously dealt with here in the islands.
Do you think the legislature will take an active role in trying to address this?
No, that would be doing the right thing for the right reason. The legislature doesn't work that way, I'm afraid. But we've got to get a handle on it, because you see, 1/3 of our budget goes into the Department of Education. And this is where our great failure is. I know we like to say, well, we have, you know, we built new schools, and we're paying our teachers more, but my teachers don't like it, but I've substituted, you get here 2 weeks early, and we do all of our workshops before you start school so that you will know what to do while you're teaching school. But to keep interrupting the school year, you see, with these days off, and this business of interrupting the school day and go to the radio and tell parents to come and get their youngsters. You see, not all parents can do that. But also, what's the message to the child?
No, I think education is it's a very challenging issue, but it is the issue that'll make a difference in a community. Right. And if you get the parents, and they don't have to be wealthy parents. I mean, if it's a parent who really cares about the child, who recognizes that education is really the key to their ability to go on to higher education and to graduate work and to be productive members of their community. I think most parents want that for their children.
Or even to go on to what we call vocational education. We consider it second class, but it really isn't, because we need, and will always need, plumbers and electricians and masons and you name it. There's a whole gamut out there where we are failing our youngsters. The skills, you see, we need those skills. We're bringing in new factories. We need skilled workers, but you can't be a skilled worker if you can't read. You can't be an electrician if you can't compute. You can't be a plumber unless you know 1/4 of an inch to thread within 1/4 of an inch. You know, all kinds of things which require basic academic preparation. I don't care if you're going to go into a skill or you're going to go to law school or medical school. The only place you can probably skate is if you go to seminary. But,
I don't think you can skate there these days, though. And I think to the extent that the schools demonstrate that they really do have the children's best interest at heart, and say to the parents, if you want your child in this school, we need for you to be engaged with the school as well. We think we educate your children very well, but there are going to be situations where we need you as a parent to get involved. You know, you should look at homework. You should say, well, are there any assignments that are outstanding? You don't have any homework in this class? Unless you as a parent ask those questions, they're not going to volunteer that information to you. But it's part of your responsibility as a parent. You want your child to be successful. You want your child to go on and do advanced education. It's not going to happen unless you're engaged.
We'll always have a few,
right.
You know, parents involved or not. They're going to do well. But that's not the group I worry about. I worry about that second tier.
Right, where the parents aren't
those
involved.
who could do well if parents were involved. Those who will not do well if parents are not involved.
Right. No, I think that's absolutely right, and I think that if the parents get engaged to really raise up the level of performance of kids throughout high school and helping them to get on to exercise the college potential, that it's there. I mean, there is still a certain degree of panache about the Virgin Islands, and you know, I saw it whenever a child was applying to Amherst that you know, if someone that I knew or knew the family, I'd always get a phone call or a letter, you know, can you write a letter of recommendation for our child? I said, well, I'll have to meet the child and talk to them and see what their aspirations are. And I can remember a couple of people who said, well, can't you just write a letter? I said, no, I'm not just going to write a letter. I value my name. I don't want my name just simply used. I want to help a student if that student really wants to take advantage of what an Amherst education offers.
And is prepared.
And is prepared to work hard. Because the thing is, if they're not prepared, I'm not going to say, take this child or, look at this child more closely. Because at the end of the day, I'm not helping that child. I think that, and from my perspective, an Amherst education is something that is really incredibly valuable. And I want a child to take full advantage of that.
Too many of our youngsters, you see, are dropping out the first and second year at the University of the Virgin Islands. The assumption being that if you have graduated from one of our high schools, you can go to the University of the Virgin Islands. Well, yes, you can enter, but it doesn't guarantee you will stay or graduate. And,
that's very true. And we get a lot of children, students, who come up from some of the other islands who don't even have the level of preparation that kids coming from Charlotte Amalia or coming from the cathedral schools have going into the classroom. I've only briefly met the new president of the university, but he seems to be very committed to a high quality of education and is holding his staff and faculty accountable, as well as the students. And I'm hopeful that this is turning the corner. But we'll have to see. Would you go back to Amherst again today?
oh yes, I don't think I would be well prepared to enter Amherst today. But,
You're too modest.
it was easy. No. I mean, what's required by the colleges and universities, you see, now I would have to do some speedy catching up.
Well, thank you very much. This has really been, for me, it's been a joy. I think that Amherst is very fortunate to count you as one of its graduates. Thank you.
Christmas Day, 25th of December, which we observe as the Nativity, the birth of Christ. In the great Eastern Church, Orthodox Church,
somebody that you have to deposit all what's in you into someone that they can pass on that legacy.
Well, you have some of them.
Yes, I do.
You were in the school?
Yes, I do. And you dedicated me.
Mr. Perryman to the office.
Getting my content.
She tired at the time. She did the thing that was fresh came on board. She was here for a while.
Yeah,
Relocated
but she was
back
pretty
to the
here.
States.
That time we were here.